So here we are, high noon live on LinkedIn, and as I promised, I have my great mate. In fact, we've been mates, Ali, for, I'm going to work this out now, it would have been about 28 years.
Really?
28 years, yes, in our youth actually.
We feel so young, Joni.
28 years, I think it's around about 28 years. My eldest daughter is nearly 25 and it was before she was born. So it could even be 30 years, 5 years before she was born. So there we go, a long, long time. Yeah. I am extremely proud of you, but like in a heartfelt, juice in my tummy, gurgly feeling that you have written this outstanding book, Belonging. It really is a masterpiece. It's very vulnerable. It's beautifully revealing. And most importantly, I'm going to speak in the first person. It really touched me in terms of shifting some of my thinking. So my first question out for you is, I've known you for, let's call it 30 years, it's easier. How did you, Ali Vaya, overcome the voices in your head to get this book out?
Joni, I was living with the voices in my head dominating my life for 59 years, paralyzing me, full of fear. And there's a beautiful story in the book, which I think you remember. It's the story of the barking dog.
Yep, I do.
And the barking dog necklace. And I wore the barking dog today as a symbol of the fact that I've overcome the barking dog.
Yep.
And now it's just a gentle woof of awareness.
Lovely.
And that's really the theme of the book.
Yes.
Because it's a mindset book rather than a memoir or anything else. I really feel it's a book about themes and mindset. Yeah.
And it's so beautiful the way you've really threaded that through the book, Ali. So in each chapter of your life, you know, from your early childhood memories to, you know, your student life to your etc. So it's all that mindset change and how you lived with it, but how you so beautifully and articulately express your vulnerability around how those voices in your head really pulled you down a lot. And we know that our voice in our head is connected to our feelings, our emotions, and then the actions that we choose to take. So really, what was the trigger for calming down that barking dog to just a quiet woof? Was there a trigger, a real one-off trigger that you can think that minimized that loudness and that real kind of committee meeting that was happening upstairs?
I think a huge catalyst was going to Mind Valley, the International Convention on Personal Development, and hearing speaker after speaker pour courage into my heart. It shifted something so dramatically in my life. And that began a whole journey, and I'd already began a journey of changing my life. And I look younger at 63 than I did at 50, ironically enough.
I do know that.
And you know me. And so I'd already started a journey, but it fast-tracked that journey to really, I'll never forget that moment in the auditorium when this amazing speaker of 27 books, Sonia Chiquette, spoke about the barking dog. And I found the barking dog necklace.
Yeah.
And it had a clock piece on the back of its barking dog. And I thought to myself, am I going to spend the rest of my life being ruled by the barking dog, or am I going to use the remaining time on earth?
Beautiful. Wow.
To make a difference in the world.
Yep.
And I knew, Joni, that if I was going to make a difference in the world, I had to still the barking dog. And so I began a journey of really reframing from constantly overthinking. And I know your model of think, feel, do.
Yes.
Think, feel, act. And I realized that all I was doing was thinking. And the thinking was paralyzing my doing. It was paralyzing my feelings.
Yes.
And so I reframed that into kindly and gently investigating my feelings. Then what did I think? Then how did that make me feel? And that reframed my thoughts. And out of that, I took more conscious actions.
Beautiful.
Out of that cycle,
Beautiful.
But it became a spiral rather than a static model.
Yes. So it is the movement. It really is. And in terms of what we do in the emotional intelligence world, is we say, let's validate those thoughts. Let's validate those emotions. And once we've validated them, let's then explore them. So how does that dance that Ali's just spoken about, the feeling to action to thought, it's a beautiful dance between those three modalities of human nature. And once we've explored that, how do we choose to transform it? So actually the acronym that we use in the EQ world, Ali, is validate, explore, transform. VET. And that's really what's uppermost in my mind.
Yes.
So when negative emotions, come flooding through, I go, okay, I'm acknowledging that's happening at the moment.
Yes.
And I'm not denying them, but I'm also not allowing them to mushroom.
Yes.
So let's explore more in our second segment, and that's really around power and fear.
Yes.
So here we are talking to Alison Beyer, the author of the book Belonging. So we spoke a lot about this kind of interplay between how we think, how we feel, and how we act, and really how we choose to remodel that and overcome some of our fears. And that's what we're going to talk about next. Can I also invite you, if you've got questions or thoughts or comments, just put those in the chat box. I'll be watching that as well as speaking to Alison so that we can really make this engaging for you, and perhaps you've got a fear that you need to overcome. So Alison, this beautiful dynamic polarity, which it is, between power and fear, and how that really influences our self-judgment and how we really overcome some of those fears using our power. How did you overcome? I mean, we all have many fears. It doesn't matter who you are. But for you specifically as Ali Beyer, what did you do?
Well, I think it's useful to use the book because that was the ultimate fear.
Yeah, to
the
write.
The book was the ultimate fear of exposing my vulnerable voice, my deepest vulnerable voice at times. And I almost had to leap over the fear. And there were 2 times where I almost kind of binned the book because of the fear. And I had to work in that spiral of being both brave and afraid at the same time.
And being comfortable with that polarity, that washing machine of emotions.
Yes, and Brené Brown talks about being brave and afraid.
Yes.
Well, I was kind of terrified and invincible. And the invincible side had to, the calling that maybe this book could change somebody else's life was what pulled me out of the terror. I don't think there's another way to say it. It was a calling.
And that calling is beautiful because you, again, that spiral and the model that I speak about of humanity, of, getting into action. So you've got that calling, you start to write and then you rewrite. And I remember part of that journey of yours of like, I'm rewriting. And I actually was with you the last weekend when you were editing this beautiful book. And you were quite exasperated as all authors are. I'm over this. We often say I'm over this because I remember with my book as well.
I think my husband was also over it, to be honest.
So it's such a pouring out of one's heart, and then exposing and what will my children say, and I know both your beautiful children and and your friends and your family members, etc. So it's a really tough one, and that self-judgment spiral. So I love Professor Kristen Neff's work on self-compassion. And really how we mindfully have to get into a space of saying, okay, it's okay to have this power and this fear and the antagonism between the two. So was there any way in which you became slightly more self-compassionate when you were writing?
Absolutely. In fact, the book was a deeply spiritual journey of forgiveness.
Beautiful.
And not so much forgiveness for other things that had happened in my life. The hardest part was forgiving myself. The book was a journey of rewriting my story. And Verity Price, the current world champion of public speaking, often talks about rewrite your story. Well, I literally went into a cave, in a way, for 2 years, really digging deep and exploring all the parts of my life and realizing, Joni, that some of the most deepest, hardest, most excruciating, humiliating moments that I took decades to forgive myself for, and it's all in the book, were my biggest awakening.
Yep. So that's really that we grow the most in our uncomfortable times.
Absolutely.
And I like to, when I'm coaching people, use that word uncomfortable. And it can be excruciatingly uncomfortable or just a little bit uncomfortable.
Indeed.
So we've got to think about our growth, and it's, post-traumatic growth as opposed to post-traumatic stress is what we often talk about. So in terms of the pouring out, because I know you're a deeply feeling person, Ali, is you probably went through, and here I'm putting words in your mouth, I hope not, is that, reliving some of those excruciating moments that you'd put in a little box in your head and, hopefully clothed and filed away. So did it surface a whole lot of other feelings that you'd kind of not wanted to revisit?
In some ways, yes. But in some ways, it was the most cathartic process of owning and liberating. Because you started off the segment saying about owning your emotions.
Yes.
So I had to go back and own those times. But in doing so, I was compassionate. And again, your reference on kindness. So the letter the book could have almost been called Letters of Forgiveness too.
Oh, lovely, lovely. So there's multi-layers of this forgiveness. It's forgiveness for yourself. It's forgiveness for past experiences that you thought, kind of really didn't serve you.
Yes.
You realize did serve you. So there's so many dimensions to forgiveness and self-compassion. So that's really that whole kindness, self-kindness versus self-judgment. So coming back to the bounce forward, which is what we often do, is in times of this discomfort and dis-ease and excruciating times in our lives, I always say to people, it's not about bouncing back, because you will never be the same person again. And you don't want to go back to that alley in your mid-20s and mid-30s. I can see your expression. You absolutely want to take adversity and challenge and say, how do I take the learning, and how do I bounce forward? And in our model, we talk about how do I bounce forward in my work and how I lead myself and others. And that's also how we inspire others around us. And obviously, your day-to-day living, which is so incredibly important. And the launch of your book, your daughter in Australia that I know so well, what has she said about your own bounce forward and transformation? Because she's a deeply spiritual woman as well.
She is indeed. And she's in some ways some of the inspiration for the book, to own the new person I have become.
I'm going to interrupt you there, because we're going to go into another segment and delve a bit deeper into this, because as mothers, as women, as people really exposing ourselves, whether it's in the media or in a book, what's the knock-on effect with our family members? So let's do a bit of that after the break. I'm finding people are battling with their sleep. So we're going to post the link of Sleep is Your Superpower if you choose to go through that course and have that life-changing power of a great night's sleep and a great brain the next day. So let's go back to Ali Vaya and speaking to her about her book, Belonging. And before the break, we were chatting about vulnerability and exposing ourselves, and of course the knock-on effect with our children and our significant others. So I was talking about Carla, your daughter, and her views on the book. And you were saying, Ali, that actually she was one of the inspirations for the book. So what comments have you had from her since she's read the book?
Just beautiful comments, and from so many other people. And that's been such an affirmation that this book was indeed a reflection of the real change I'd undergone. I literally don't feel like the same person I used to
No,
be.
you don't even look like the same person.
Even my spine was all bent.
That's true.
Because my
I remember
self-esteem was so bad.
Yep, lowering your head, chin to chest. I remember your posture.
Yeah.
It's changed dramatically. So your mindset has led to a kind of a new Ellie, a new identity. I bet you Friedel, your husband, is saying, hey, I've got a new wife on my hands. This is quite sexy and lekker.
Well, if you read the book, you'll read about finding Jessica.
That's right, which is so beautiful in the book.
Which is my middle name.
Yeah. So, Ellie, I mean, the theme for our interview today is change your thoughts to change your world.
Yes.
And actually, one of the greatest neuroscience books that I've ever read, I probably only understood half of it, was Change Your Words to Change Your World. So there's a huge brain science around actually when you change your mindset, you will change your identity. And you will start to change the way you act, and you'll change the way you acknowledge your feelings and deal with your feelings. And those negative voices in your head, which is where we started today's interview. So what is Ellie's new identity all about? I mean, how is your life panning out now post the book? I know you've spoken to me about really touching people's hearts and making significant differences in people's lives. So what's the new identity all about?
The new identity is going from a young woman who then became a middle-aged woman, who was still plagued with so much self-doubt, yo-yo dieting, depression, anxiety, bulimia. I write about it in the book.
You do.
I'm open, I'm honest, I'm transparent. I am not the same person I used to be. Now moving is part of my identity. I have a loving relationship with food, and I have a loving relationship with myself. I have a loving relationship with my body, my relationships. It's changed my relationships with my children, my husband, my friends, my everything. And it's made me so much more open with people, which is why I have tribes of people now that I interact with. And the PSA, the Speakers Association and Mind Valley is just an example of those tribes.
Yeah.
It changed everything, Joni. So it was a combination of mindset and behavioral change and how they work together.
That's right.
Exactly as your model.
Yep, exactly.
Thinking,
it feeling, and acting. So that will change. Your mindset is not only the thinking, it's how you're feeling, because feelings really kind of trigger the mindset. In fact, just going back to Dr. Kristen Neff, I just wrote something down in preparation, is she spoke about 3 components to self-compassion, which is really what this whole interview has been about. So the 3 components, the first, she says, if you break down self-compassion, the first component is self-kindness versus self-judgment, which is what Ali's spoken about. The second is mindfulness versus identification. So being in the moment, really choosing to be vulnerable, be authentic, be yourself, be interpersonally well connected. And this last point that Ali's made, which I really love around her tribes, is what Kristen Neff says, a common humanity. So that's a tribe versus being in isolation. So that being in isolation, locked into your head, locked into yo-yo dieting, locked into that fight with food and bulimia is such a lonely world.
Oh, it's lonely. Oh, it's lonely.
So now the tribes, now the sharing, now the learning, now realizing that everybody has a few demons in their head to fight. And kind of those negative thoughts pop up and you've got to go like, to bed today, to bed. You know, you're not taking over. You're not going to be the barking dog, which is where we started out the interview today. So I think for all of us, one of the key takeouts of today is what is our barking dog saying to us? And how can you, I love the way you express that, and I love the way you express yourself in your book, Ellie, is bring it down to a quiet woof. You and I share the love of dogs.
A gentle woof with the tail wagging. I mean, how different is that?
It's so vastly different. And then creating this new identity and this new joie de vivre. So, you know, I always look at people's eyes and I say we forget that there are 74 muscles around each eye. So it's, you know, really delving into actually what is that eye language? What's the soul saying through the eye language? And your eyes are brighter, livelier, as you said earlier, your posture has changed. So you are so vastly different as a woman, owning your space, owning your ground, and knowing that what you are doing is making a difference. So this book, you know, everyone who reads it is coming back and saying, hey, Ali, I've shifted this, or my behavior's changed in this way because you have inspired me. So that must make you feel unbelievably fulfilled, is this inspiring other people around you.
Yes, and the fact that I could be that vulnerable is what shifted things, because suddenly people are having conversations now that they never had before with me.
That's it.
Because I have been so vulnerable. That's the shift.
Yes. So it's good old Brené Brown again, courage over comfort.
It is.
And I never forget quite a few years ago when I watched her TED Talk, and that rumbling with vulnerability.
Yes.
And thinking, so who's this woman? You know, why have 35 million people watched her TED Talk? And I just thought to myself, okay, we all need to rumble with vulnerability. And doesn't that just make that connection with people on a different level? When you're vulnerable, you are yourself, and, you know, you expose all of those warts and all, issues, feelings, thoughts, things that you did to yourself in the past. People go, I get it, I get it, I get it. I've done some of that stuff too. So that's a fantastic way of transforming and going to the new Ali, the new sense of identity, and then saying, I want to be part of these tribes. I love this byline to your book, Belonging, finding tribes of meaning.
Yes.
And actually deciding out of choice who you want to spend time with, who gives you meaning, and how does that reciprocity work for you in these tribes.
Absolutely. Because it's the tribes that have given me courage.
Yes.
And confidence.
And that reciprocity, you've given people in the tribes courage and confidence to go out and write their books or be on podcasts or do their talks, etc. So I really want to thank Ali Vaya. I want to thank her for really changing her thoughts to change her world, which in you know, kind of the knock-on effect is we have this magnificent book called Belonging, and I'd really, really just like to wrap up saying, go out and get it. Where can they go out and get it?
It's on my website, www.alisonvaya.com, and we are working at getting it into major bookstores, and I'm working with an Amazon specialist, but it's a process, and Belonging, I think, will have its own journey of belonging.
Excellent. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your heart, and thank you for what you've given us in your beautiful book.
Thank you, Joni.